I am Regional Director for the FTC's Western Region. We have offices in San Francisco and LA. This roundtable is going to be a great opportunity for the industry, for community groups, for enforcers, to talk about debt collection practices and the Latino community. We have folks from the FTC, we have folks from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a new federal agency with new powers. We've got a lot of staff and officials from them that you'll be hearing from today. We also have our partners in Southern California. We're always proud to work with Los Angeles Department of Consumer Affairs, Brian Steger and Rigo Reyes. We have the California State AG's office, and most importantly, we have Professor Peter Krejza and the Cal State Long Beach folks who are hosting us, and we really appreciate everything you've done to make this a successful conference. And so now it is my pleasure to start this off by introducing Ricardo Lara, the California State Senator for this district. Senator Lara was elected in November 2012 to represent the 33rd District, which includes Huntington Park and Long Beach. Raised in a blue-collar immigrant family in East LA, Senator Lara knows firsthand the challenges facing the cities and communities of Southeast Los Angeles County. Senator?
Thank you, Tom. Welcome to Long Beach. Welcome to the 33rd Senate District. It's my pleasure to give you the official bienvenida, as we say in Spanish. It's great to be here. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for coming today and talking about such an important topic. And as I was walking over, just thinking about the importance of not only protecting the Latino community, but protecting all immigrant communities from ensuring that they're not subject to any form of discrimination or being accosted by some unscrupulous methods of debt collection. And so, as the chair of the Latino Caucus, I want to thank the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for holding its important discussion about debt collection and the Latino community here in Long Beach. The Latino Caucus in California is made up of 24 members, 17 members of the Assembly and 7 in the State Senate, who represent a wide array of constituencies up and down California. For those of you that might not be aware, Latinos constitute now the plurality in California, 39% of the general population, coupled with the fact that more than 51% of the children in our public schools today are made up of Latinos. Coupled with African Americans and API, we become 70% of the kids in our public schools. So it's important more than ever that we work together not only to protect our immigrant communities, but that we ensure the success of these kids, because without their success, the future of California will surely falter. Proud to say that California is back stronger than ever. We are back as the 8th largest economy in the world. We have just surpassed Russia and Italy's economy. By 2015, we're scheduled to surpass the UK and France, putting us as the 6th largest economy in the world. And proud to say that California is truly a nation state, made up of a wide array of people from all over the world. And as the former chairman of the Select Committee on Financial Empowerment, we are working in the legislature to ensure that we work with our immigrant communities to ensure that we educate them on how to build wealth and how to protect themselves and how to ensure that they know what their rights are in terms of not only their financial empowerment. And I use my own families as an example. As somebody who has 2 parents who are immigrants from Mexico, I wish they understood what it was to even have a discussion about money and how to protect yourselves and how to ensure that you know your rights when it comes to not only debt collection, but building wealth for yourself, banking on your future and ensuring that you build a nest egg for the next generation. A lot of us don't have that luxury, and especially for those of us that have parents who are working 2-3 jobs to make ends meet. And so I just want to welcome you again this morning. We have our staff on the live stream as well and trying to figure out what we can do as a state to continue to move policies that protect our vulnerable Californians and ensure that they also have and understand their rights as consumers here in our great state. And so I want to just thank you again, and hopefully you have a wonderful conference here. And again, welcome to Long Beach. I would like now to take the opportunity to welcome our next distinguished speaker, who is a native of Southern California, Chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission, Edith Ramirez. Edith was sworn in as Commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission in April 2010 and became the Chairwoman of the FTC in March 2013. At the FTC, Chairwoman Ramirez has focused on promoting competition and innovation in the technology and healthcare sectors, protecting consumers from deceptive and unfair practices, and safeguarding our consumer privacy. Before joining the FTC, Chairwoman Ramirez was a partner in the Los Angeles office of Quinn Emanuel, or I hope I said this right, or Quat and Sullivan, and where she litigated complex business disputes, including intellectual property, antitrust, unfair competition, and advertising matters. She is a graduate of Harvard Law School, where she was the editor of the Harvard Law Review and Harvard College. Very impressive. Please join me in welcoming Chairwoman Edith Ramirez.
Thank you very much, Senator Lara. It is truly a delight for me to be here with you this morning. As has been mentioned, I am a Southern California native, so it's wonderful to be here back home from Washington to have an opportunity to discuss very important issues with you today. And I'm very pleased, of course, to welcome all of you to this joint Federal Trade Commission and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau roundtable on this incredibly important issue of debt collection issues facing the Latino community, especially those Latinos who have limited English proficiency. This discussion really couldn't be more timely. It addresses the impact of one of the most important consumer protection issues on one of the nation's largest and fastest growing communities. Debt collection and related credit reporting issues affect just about every single American in one way or another. The Federal Reserve estimated in 2013 that 30 million Americans, or nearly 15% of the adult population, had a debt in third-party collections. The Fed also found that the average size of that debt was $1,400. More recently, a study by the Urban Institute estimated that 35% of Americans with a credit record have debts and unpaid bills that have been reported to collection agencies. So in light of these significant statistics, you won't be surprised to hear that the FTC receives more complaints about debt collection than any other industry. Last year, for example, the FTC received over 204,000 complaints in this area, representing nearly a quarter of all of the complaints that we received last year. So debt collection has been and is going to continue to be a major priority for me and for my agency. In fact, for several years, we've been stepping up our law enforcement in this area. And as we examine debt collection and potential abuses by collectors, I think it's important to discuss the impact that they have on the many diverse communities that we work to serve. So for this reason, I recently launched what we at the FTC call the Every Community Initiative. It's designed to ensure that our efforts reach all consumers, including those who may experience the market differently or may be harder to reach with law enforcement and education efforts. As part of that initiative, we're trying to broaden our understanding of the debt collection and credit reporting experiences of limited English proficiency consumers. So the Latino community is a natural place to start because it represents the largest group of limited English proficiency consumers in the United States. Approximately 34 million Americans speak Spanish at home. In fact, I grew up speaking Spanish at home. I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants. Of those 34 million Americans, approximately 10 million don't speak English well. While many Americans speak languages other than English or Spanish, no other language is nearly as prevalent. So we believe that learning about Latino consumers in this context will help us better understand the experiences and challenges faced by other groups with limited English language skills. In addition, consumer advocates have voiced concerns to the FTC that debt collection practices that are aimed at Spanish-speaking consumers may be particularly egregious. Our own law enforcement experience suggests that this may be the case. The Commission has brought a number of cases against companies that have targeted Spanish speakers with deceptive and abusive conduct. And in fact, just this week, we obtained a temporary restraining order against an operation, Centro Natural, that we allege targeted Spanish-speaking consumers with deceptive and harassing collection calls for debts they often didn't even owe. We charged in our complaint that these defendants also masqueraded as government or court officials and threatened consumers with legal proceedings if they failed to pay. But the purpose of the roundtable is not to address these issues with any preconceived notions. It's instead designed to gather information. We want to hear the perspective of all interested parties: consumers, debt collectors, the credit reporting industry, consumer advocates, community service organizations, academics, and state regulators. We also hope this event will raise awareness within Latino communities about the work of the FTC and the CFPB. And specifically, we want consumers to contact us if they have a problem with a debt collector or with the credit reporting process. We hope that those of you in the audience who have Latino clients will encourage them to submit complaints to us. To reach the FTC, consumers can call our Consumer Response Center at 877-FTC-HELP and speak to our Spanish-speaking complaint representatives. They can also submit written complaints online in either English or Spanish at our website, ftc.gov/complaint, or ftc.gov/queja. If your clients are uncomfortable submitting their complaints themselves, we ask you to assist them. We often use these complaints to determine which companies we'll target for law enforcement, so we absolutely want to be sure that we're hearing from the Latino community. And beyond receiving consumer complaints, we also want to make sure that we're educating Latino consumers about their legal rights. We have useful materials explaining the relevant law and the debt collection and credit reporting processes more generally, many of which are also available in Spanish. And we have copies of these materials here today, and we hope that you'll take them back to your offices. If you want larger quantities, you should also feel free to order them in bulk from our website. Another goal of today's roundtable is to hear from industry and to learn about the companies that collect from Spanish speakers. Among the questions that we're going to be asked is whether these collectors use different methods when collecting from Latinos than from other consumers. What triggers their decisions to communicate with a consumer in Spanish rather than in English? And if a creditor or a debt buyer decides to communicate with a consumer in Spanish, does that company pass this information on to whichever company later purchases the consumer's debt? Finally, today's roundtable also provides us with a wonderful opportunity to strengthen our partnerships with community legal services agencies, consumer advocacy organizations, and state law enforcement agencies. We're already working very closely with many of you, and we hope to collaborate even further to provide greater protection for our nation's consumers. Let me just take a few minutes right now to tell you about the excellent program that we have planned for today. Following my remarks, you're going to hear next from Sixta Martinez of the CFPB, and then from Marisabel Torres of the National Council of La Raza. She will set the stage for the rest of the day by talking about Latinos' access to financial products and their engagement in this marketplace. We'll then have our first panel, which will examine the collection of debts from Latino consumers before litigation. This group will discuss whether some Latinos perceive debt and debt collection differently than other consumers, and how working with limited English proficiency Latinos affects the collection process, as well as whether there are best practices for collecting from Latinos generally and limited English fluency Latinos more specifically. Our second panel will begin right after lunch and will focus on the experiences of limited English proficiency Latinos once the collection litigation process begins. The panelists will discuss whether these consumers have a harder time accessing the courts when sued for a debt, and whether debt collectors use different litigation methods with Latinos than they do with other consumers. Our third panel will address credit reporting issues among LEP Latinos, including whether there are factors that make it more difficult for them to obtain their credit reports, understand those reports, and dispute inaccurate information. The panel will also discuss whether consumers should be able to dispute the items on their credit reports in Spanish. Our final panel will focus on developing improved strategies for educating and reaching out to Latinos about debt collection. Among other topics, the group will provide a high-level overview of available educational resources and discuss how we can do a better job of educating Latino consumers about their rights in debt collection and credit reporting. To close the program, Gail Hillebrand of the CFPB and Chris Cagle of the FTC will talk about the lessons we've learned during the course of the day and steps that we can all take to protect consumers. So we've got a terrific day planned ahead. But before turning the floor over to Sixta, I want to take this opportunity to thank the people who made this event possible. Let me give another shout out to Cal State Long Beach for generously providing this terrific venue, and in particular to Professor Peter Kresa for his tireless efforts helping us plan this event. Let me also thank Rigo Reyes of the LA County Department of Consumer Affairs and Pastor Herrera, formerly at the Department of Consumer Affairs. He's now a professor at Cal State Northridge. Both of them provided incredibly valuable suggestions, advice, and assistance. The CFPB and its staff, I also want to thank them for co-hosting this roundtable with us, and also our FTC staff, including Chris Cagle, Tom Kane, Cristina Miranda, Ann Stahl, and Marisela Segura. And finally, I want to thank the panelists for giving their time and their expertise in helping us examine these critically important questions. So thank you all very much, and I hope that you find today interesting and a great learning experience. Thank you. And let me hand the floor over to Sixta Martinez. Actually, I think Tom is good. We're going to give a brief introduction. Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman Ramirez. I just want to tell you a little bit about our next speaker, Sixta Martinez, who is Associate Director for External Affairs at the CFPB. She joined the CFPB from Freddie Mac, where she was Senior Director for Industry and State Relations. Before that, she was Director at the National Fair Housing Alliance, Legislative Staff Attorney at MALDEF, Housing Policy Analyst for National Council of La Raza, and a staffer in the U.S. House of Representatives. Sixta?
Thank you, Tom, for the kind introduction. Thank you to Senator Lara for his work on behalf of Latinos and consumers. And thank you to the Federal Trade Commission and Chairwoman Ramirez for partnering with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to examine how debt collection and credit reporting issues affect the Latino community. And thank you all for joining us today to take part of this substantive and important conversation. I'm very pleased to be here today to provide an overview of the CFPB and discuss the steps that the Bureau is taking to assist Latinos in the consumer financial products and services market. There are over 54 million Latinos in the US, and it is important that our voices and experiences help shape the market for consumer financial products and services. By joining us today, you are providing critical information to the CFPB and FTC on issues that Latino consumers face when they deal with debt collectors or credit reporting companies. As the Associate Director for External Affairs at the CFPB, I have the responsibility, and the privilege for ensuring that the Bureau has the benefit of a wide range of perspectives, feedback, and expertise to inform the Bureau's work, including the perspective of nonprofits and community groups, Congress, our local, state, and federal government partners, the financial services industry, its trade associations and representatives, academics, and many others. The CFPB is an independent federal agency whose mission is to help consumer finance markets work by making rules more effective, by consistently and fairly enforcing those rules, and by empowering consumers to take more control over their economic lives. As many of you may know, before the financial crisis, authority for consumer financial protection laws was delegated to 7 different federal agencies, none of which had all the tools needed to oversee the entire consumer finance market. In July 2010, Congress passed and President Obama signed the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which created the CFPB. 1 year later, the CFPB formally opened for business. So we're a relatively new federal agency, but we have not squandered our youth. Here's a snapshot of some of what we've been up to. Our supervision and enforcement efforts together have provided approximately $5.75 billion in funds and relief to over 15 million consumers. We've handled complaints from approximately 460,000 consumers about the problems they experience with consumer financial products and services. In the student loan market, we've teamed up with the Department of Education to create tools like the Financial Aid Shopping Sheet, which has been voluntarily adopted by over 2,000 colleges and universities. We've issued a remittance rule that for the first time allows remittance centers to know how much it will cost to send a remittance and how much a loved one will receive with greater certainty and with applicable consumer protections. We've also issued 7 mortgage rules that are fundamentally restructuring the mortgage market. To give you a better sense of our mission and the tools that we have to fulfill it, let me briefly describe some of the work that our divisions are currently undertaking. The Bureau's Office of Consumer Response assists consumers in submitting complaints and connects consumers to useful information about financial products and services. We take complaints about credit cards, mortgages, student loans, checking accounts, auto loans, remittances, debt collection, prepaid cards, debit cards, payday loans, and credit reporting. Consumers can submit a complaint at consumerfinance.gov, by U.S. mail, by fax, or by calling 1-855-411-2372. Spanish-speaking consumers who call in with their complaint can speak to a consumer representative in Spanish and can receive regular updates on their complaint in Spanish. The CFPB hotline also offers assistance in 180 other languages. In many cases, we are able to get people relief, either money back, or correcting their credit report, or stopping harassing phone calls by debt collectors, just to give a few examples. Debt collection is our largest source of consumer complaints. We receive approximately 6,700 debt collection complaints per month. These complaints are not only opportunities for us to assist consumers, they also make a difference by informing our work and helping us identify problems. They feed into another division that has an important tool to fulfill our mandate. That's the Division of Supervision, Enforcement, and Fair Lending. This division's work is focused on issues of compliance with the law and identifying risks to consumers. The CFPB supervises depository financial institutions with over $10 billion in assets, and we supervise non-bank entities in the mortgage business, payday lenders, and private student loan companies of all sizes. We also supervise the larger participants of the non-bank debt collection, consumer reporting, and remittance markets. Last month, we announced a proposal to oversee the larger non-bank auto finance companies for the first time at the federal level. That proposal is currently open, and we welcome your comments. The Bureau's Supervision, Enforcement, and Fair Lending offices enforce federal consumer financial protection laws in order to create a fair environment for all market participants, consumers, and providers alike. We recognize that the financial industry can provide great value to consumers by offering appropriate products and services. However, we will use our enforcement tools to address bad actors in the market that seek an unfair competitive advantage based on skirting the law and mistreating consumers. For instance, in June of this year, the Bureau ordered GE Capital to provide an estimated $225 million in relief to consumers harmed by illegal and discriminatory credit card practices. CFPB examiners identified a number of deceptive marketing practices and discovered that GE Capital did not extend certain promotional offers that allowed consumers to cancel a portion of their debt to consumers who indicated that they preferred to communicate in Spanish or had a mailing address in Puerto Rico, even if that consumer met the promotion's qualifications. This meant that Hispanic populations were unfairly denied the opportunity to benefit from these debt cancellation promotions. This is just one example of CFPB enforcement actions that have resulted in nearly $5.75 billion in refunds and relief to over 15 million consumers who had been subjected to illegal practices. The Bureau's Division of Consumer Education and Engagement is dedicated to making sure that consumers are empowered with proven, effective financial education tools and resources that will assist them in making sound financial choices. Our primary goal is to help consumers understand the costs, risks, and benefits of financial products that will help them achieve their personal financial goals. My colleague, Gail Hillebrand, the Associate Director for Consumer Education and Engagement, is here with us today and will share more about the Bureau's consumer-focused tools when she closes out today's program. Since we are here today to talk about debt collection and credit reporting, I want to take just a moment to talk about our Division of Research, Regulations, and Markets, which last year issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking known as an ANPR on debt collection. We are considering developing rules because of the persistence of significant consumer protection problems in debt collection, despite vigorous government use of enforcement, education, and other efforts to address them. Nearly 1 out of every 10 American consumers came out of the financial crisis with 1 or more debts in collection. This market is also the single biggest source of complaints to the federal government. We are considering developing rules to evaluate whether certain standards need to be clarified in light of the significant technological changes in the debt collection industry since the enactment of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act in 1977. Debt collection reduces the cost creditors incur through their lending activities. It does this directly through the amounts that collection recovers from consumers for owners of debts, but also indirectly underscores that creditors must be prudent in lending money that a consumer can repay. Potentially, these reductions in losses in turn allow creditors to provide more credit to consumers at lower prices through lower interest rates, for example. But there are also risks to consumers arising from debt collection. Some of the issues under consideration by the Bureau as we weigh new protections include the accuracy of information used by debt collectors, how to ensure that consumers know their rights, and the communication tactics that collectors use. We asked consumers to share with the Bureau their experiences with debt collectors and asked the industry for information about their practices. We received over 23,000 comments. We heard from individual consumers, consumer advocates, vendors, original creditors, debt collectors, debt buyers, plaintiff and defense attorneys, as well as members of Congress. While we are still carefully reviewing these comments and issues, several themes are developing. First, a significant number of commenters focused on the types of information that should travel with debt collection when it is sold and the consumer advantages that might result from the transfer of additional information. Commenters also question whether certain types of debt, specifically medical or student loan debt, should require more or less documentation. Second, the debt industry has experienced significant technological changes since the enactment of the FDCPA in 1977. Currently, the FDCPA does not specifically address the use of new types of technology, like email. As a result, many commenters thought it would be useful for the Bureau to address the use of newer technologies, updating the legal framework to protect today's consumers and to allow fair and appropriate use of modern technology is a high priority for the CFPB. Third, many consumer groups and industry representatives supported rules addressing or clarifying issues related to the proper time, place, and manner of debt collection communications. However, there was no consensus view on how the Bureau should address these issues. Fourth, consumer groups stated that there were ongoing problems with consumers not receiving adequate service of process and with debt collectors not having sufficient documentation to support claims in court. 31 state attorneys general filed a letter with the Bureau noting that the CFPB's rules could be used to complement some of the changes in court procedures that are occurring in the states. In addition to these issues, 3 ANPR questions sought comments about collecting debts from limited English-speaking consumers. One thing we heard repeatedly was that the FDCPA, which also governs communications between debt collectors and consumers, does not explicitly address collections in Spanish or, for that matter, in any other language. So, for example, there is no clear guidance for businesses or consumers on whether the statutorily required validation notice, which provides consumers with certain information about the debt and the consumer's right to request verifications of that debt, can or should be in Spanish. Commenters stressed that the interpretation and application of some FDCPA provisions relating to communications might be especially relevant to Spanish language collections. The Bureau and the FTC are especially interested in what our panelists have to say about this and other topics at the roundtable today. In addition to the tools I've identified, the CFPB has taken a number of other steps specifically geared towards improving consumer protection for the Latino community. We regularly convene a cross-divisional Bureau-wide language access working group dedicated to addressing consumers' language access needs in the consumer finance space. Indeed, the Bureau's Consumer Advisory Board convened a public hearing on this topic last May. Recently, we released a proposed language access plan, which when finalized will outline the Bureau's approach to better serving consumers in other languages. The proposed plan was published in the Federal Register on October 8th, and again, we welcome your comments. And I am pleased to announce today that we are further assisting Spanish-speaking consumers by publishing 5 different action letters in Spanish that will provide instructions on how to send an English language version of the same letter to communicate with a debt collector. These letters are not meant to be a substitute for legal advice or representation that consumers may want to seek to preserve their legal rights. Rather, they are important tools that consumers can use to proactively protect themselves and that consumer advocates can use to assist their clients. The point of these action letters is to place debt collection activities on the plane where they belong. They are business dealings that should not be unfair, deceptive, or abusive. Armed with the knowledge of their rights and how to pursue them, consumers will be able to defend against such tactics in a deliberate and well-informed manner. These resources are available as part of our Ask CFPB at consumerfinance.gov, CFPB en Español. I'll close by reiterating, the Bureau will strive to continue to be thoughtful about which tools to rely upon as we work to make markets for consumer financial products and services work for Latinos and for all consumers. Our approach to engaging with the Hispanic community is to ensure that Latino groups like NCLR and many, many others join us at the table on every issue, sharing their expertise, feedback, and insight. This is our commitment to engaging with consumer groups, regardless of their affinity focus. And just to give you an idea of the volume of our engagement with nonprofit and community groups, between April and June of this year, the Bureau completed 100 formal engagements, including 71 policy meetings, 17 roundtables and conference calls, and 12 public events and experiences to engage consumer and civil rights groups over a 3-month period. It is also of utmost importance to me personally and integral to the Bureau's mission that we do our best to have our workforce reflect the broad diversity of the American public. The Bureau has met with the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, among others, on the issue of attracting Hispanic talent at all levels of the Bureau. And we are extremely fortunate that the CFPB's director, Richard Cordray, is deeply committed to equal opportunity and fairness. We believe diversity strengthens an organization. As a general principle, diversity is good for all businesses and the customers they serve. Diversity fosters greater understanding and greater opportunities. We believe in these principles when it comes to the consumer financial markets, and we believe in these principles when it comes to our own operations. Thank you for joining FTC and the CFPB here today to discuss and learn more about debt collection and credit reporting issues that affect Latino consumers. With eager anticipation, I look forward to listening and learning from our roundtable experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sixta. Next, I would like to introduce Marisabel Torres, Senior Policy Analyst at National Council of La Raza. In her current position, Ms. Torres focuses on banking and home ownership policies affecting Latino families. She holds a BA in International Affairs from the University of Mary Washington. Marisabel.
Hi, good morning. I'm very happy to be joining you here today. For those who are not familiar with the National Council of La Raza, we're the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights and advocacy organization. We have a network of close to 300 affiliated organizations who are all independent, nonprofit, consumer-based organizations throughout the country. We are able to reach Latinos in about 41 states through our CBO network. 61 of those community-based organizations in our network are actually housed in California. So are we ready? Okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background sort of on some of the demographic issues facing Latinos, as well as what some of the research that NCLR has done specifically on financial access for Latinos and immigrants in the financial engagement and the formal financial industry relationships that they have. So Latino families share the same fundamental goals of financial security and upward mobility as the vast majority of all Americans. And to achieve the security that has long characterized the middle class, most are relying on financial tools, including home ownership, to gradually expand their access to wealth-sustaining or income-generating assets. Building positive net worth and an asset-based financial safety net often takes years or even decades. True transformation of the Latino community will come when assets are successfully maintained over their life cycles and passed on to their children. Unfortunately, attainment of this goal has been impeded for a significant number of Hispanic families. Current economic conditions have exacerbated the historical and systemic barriers that Hispanic households confront when connecting with entry-level financial tools and long-term assets as well. All right, we're going to miss one. The 2010 decennial census results have documented the growing demographic changes throughout the nation, and we know that more than half of the growth of the total U.S. population from 2000 to 2010 was attributed to the Hispanic population, which now constitutes about 16% of the total U.S. population. Data show that investment in Hispanic families and children will benefit the national economy. However, the Great Recession has eroded most of the gains in financial security and asset accumulation of the last decade and set families further behind. So this information is from a recent report by the Urban Institute, which is showing us, basically it illustrates the racial wealth gap. And so we know that it's widened since the recession. In 2010, white families had on average more than 6 times the wealth of African Americans and Hispanics. Between 2007 and 2010, Hispanic wealth was cut by over 40% compared to white families' wealth, which fell by about 11%. Because many Hispanic families bought homes just before the recession, the sharp decline in housing prices resulted in a massive loss of home equity and consequently wealth for these families. And we know that the gaps will only widen without targeted federal policies that promote financial access, stability, and affordable homeownership opportunities. So 5 years after the collapse of the subprime mortgage market and the ensuing financial crisis, the nation's housing and financial markets remain broken. Federal efforts to resolve the foreclosure crisis fell short, and enforcement action against egregious violations of the public's trust by financial institutions only got underway in earnest in about 2012. The path to financial security has been further muddled by a political environment that continues to scapegoat immigrants for a wide range of social concerns. Moreover, regulators, policymakers, and industry officials often overlook the unique needs of Latino and immigrant consumers, such as the need for more flexible underwriting criteria, which is why roundtables like today and efforts by the FTC and CFPB are so important to fix these problems. Sorry. Okay. However, the financial stability and home purchasing power of immigrants should be a primary concern for local and national financial markets. Immigrants are disproportionately unbanked and rely heavily on high-cost financial services and are a target of predatory loans and financial products. Research shows that children emulate the banking habits of their parents often, meaning that the disenfranchisement of immigrants from mainstream banking could linger into the next generation. Furthermore, the future financial needs of immigrants are compelling. Should comprehensive immigration reform, or rather when comprehensive immigration reform becomes law, undocumented immigrants will most likely have to pay fines as their first step towards legal status, plus additional fees throughout the process of becoming a legal permanent resident and ultimately a U.S. citizen. With an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the country, this could translate into a multi-billion-dollar market for small dollar loans. In addition, immigrants and their children will account for 82% of the growth in new households between 2005 and 2050. By 2020, half of home buyers will be Latino. This potential demonstrates a compelling case for ensuring that the housing and financial markets are inclusive and sustainable for all consumers. So this is just some demographic information from Census 2010, showing that over half of Hispanic children have at least one parent who is an immigrant. The foreign-born in the U.S. makes up 12% of the total population, and almost 40% of the foreign-born in the U.S. are from Mexico or Central America. In addition, since we are talking about an LEP population, this is speaking to the language needs of the Hispanic community. We have 55.5 million people in the U.S. who currently speak a language other than English. 34.1 million are speaking Spanish. And then just for California alone, 14.2 million residents speak a language other than English at home, and 9.5 million speak Spanish. And of that 9.5, almost 5 million speak English, and this is all self-selected information. They report that they speak English less than very well. So when we're talking about the language needs, we know that this is actually a pretty substantial segment of the population that has these issues. So to give a little bit of background about where we are today, I'm going to start with some of the structural flaws that existed in the financial market to get us where we are. So we know that there's unequal access to financial products that are really key to economic success. And as a result, minorities have routinely paid more for things like credit that have often been accompanied by risky terms. So specifically, deficient oversight failed Latino communities and other minority communities, and those of modest means in the following ways. So first, access to prime products was restricted even when borrowers had good credit and high incomes. And this most often occurred because short-term profits were prioritized over long-term gains. So for instance, many Hispanic borrowers have unique profiles that creditors often considered hard to serve. So despite the fact that sound underwriting models do exist and products exist that can serve these communities or consumers with these characteristics, there was little incentives to sell them in the marketplace. Such models earned issuers little profit, while subprime models had streamlined underwriting processes and were easy to line with high fees and inflated interest rates. The profitability of the models was also set in part by the price that Wall Street was willing to pay for the risk. So expensive and risky subprime credit became readily available, while affordable and low-risk prime credit was restricted. In this way, expensive and risky products drove out those that were most favorable to borrowers. And as a result, Latino families have paid more for credit in most market segments. They were 30% more likely to receive high-cost mortgages, nearly twice as likely as white families to have credit card interest rates over 20%, and were more likely to be charged costly markups on their auto loans. The second point is that disparate impact trends and practices were not properly identified, investigated, and acted upon. And despite the clear evidence that minority borrowers were paying more for credit and being steered into subprime credit when they qualified for prime, trends went unnoticed by federal regulators. Analysts claimed that there was not enough data to take enforcement action against specific lenders. And at the same time, research shows that payday lenders, buy here, pay here, auto dealers, and other fringe financial providers were clustering in minority communities. So they really had a prime audience because they were really zeroing in and targeting low-income consumers. The third point I'll make on this is that shopping for credit was nearly impossible for consumers. Many experts pointed to the growing complexity of credit products, and many reports demonstrated that consumers lacked the information necessary to make sound decisions. Prior to Wall Street reform, credit card, auto, and mortgage offers were not traditionally transparent, although you can argue that there's still a bit of a ways to go in that, where that's concerned. But borrowers were often unaware of the hidden costs in the loans that they were taking. So few shopping tools have existed that could help borrowers to create true cost comparisons. And as a result, many borrowers were foregoing shopping altogether and were settling for what was presented as the least complicated product at the time that they needed it. So the lack of oversight had serious consequences for families and local and national economies. The economic recession was driven by predatory lending and unsustainable and unsuitable mortgage products in the market. This, coupled with a high rate of unemployment, created the perfect storm for a crisis of the proportion that we saw begin a few years ago and that we're still trying to come out of today. So the most recent recession undoubtedly took a toll on the way that families were managing their finances. And as we move closer to recovering from the economic downturn, the needs of these communities are great. Unemployment and foreclosure drained family savings and increased debt. And as we've seen in earlier slides, we know that the racial wealth gap is in fact real. So now to talk a little bit specifically about financial access and the way that the community is engaging with the mainstream financial services market. I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that shows exactly where Latinos are. So while we know it's not a silver bullet, owning a basic checking or savings account at a bank or credit union is fundamental to improving the economic stability for communities and building tangible assets, which includes a credit history. So this is information from the 2011 FDIC unbanked and underbanked survey of households. I believe that the new research will be released in about a week or so. So this is current up until that data comes out soon. But what this is showing is people who are unbanked in certain demographic characteristics and those who are underbanked. And for those who are familiar with the terms, unbanked means that someone does not have an established relationship with a banking or credit union. So they don't have a bank account or a checking account, savings account. And then underbanked is someone who does have that relationship established but continues to use alternative financial services. So what you can see is for the country as a whole, 8.2% are considered unbanked. But when you look at Hispanics, that goes up to 20.1%. And then when we're looking at just foreign-born non-US citizens, that goes higher to 22.2% who are not in the formal financial system. So while the numbers of American households who are considered un- and underbanked has actually been on the rise over the past few years, we know that this is a problem that has ramifications outside of just where you're conducting your everyday financial transactions. Individuals who are carrying cash on them rather than in an account are putting themselves in physical danger. And we know that there are institutions like the Latino Credit Union in North Carolina was established to specifically serve immigrant Hispanics in the state, and physical harm was really one of the driving forces between the decision to establish this credit union, because they knew that people were being targeted because they were carrying cash. People who lack access to safe and affordable financial products and services are often left with riskier and often more expensive financial tools. As I went over a little bit earlier, we know that that has led to the decimation of wealth because people really didn't have a lot of options when they were shopping for financial products that they thought would help get them ahead and stabilize their finances. And this is actually also from the FDIC. We see that people who tend to be outside of the banking system have some characteristics like non-Asian minorities. And actually, when I say non-Asian minorities, I want to say that sometimes this population, some of the information get a little bit skewed, because we know that within the Asian population there are many different demographic characteristics, and like home country and language spoken can also affect the reach that they have into and the levels of financial engagement that they have. So I say that with a caveat. And if you want information specifically on Asian financial engagement or AAPI financial engagement, I would encourage you to look at National Capacity, the Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, and some of the researches they have on poverty and financial engagement as well. But we know that lower income households also tend to be outside of the banking system. We know that people who are not English speaking also tend to have some more barriers to accessing products. Unemployed and younger households, or households who are headed by younger people. So NCLR has actually done some original research looking at the Latino community. We've done 2 rounds of research. The first one was actually looking at Latinos in California specifically. That was done in 2012. The report was released in 2013. And so these are some of the findings that we have. So people, are operating in large part within the formal financial system, but we do have a significant segment that is not. And so we ask people, what tools are you using? If you're not using a basic checking or savings account, for your financial transactions, what are you doing? And so a lot of people are using alternative financial services. And so when we ask people why they were using these services, even though they might have a bank in their community, or someone, in their family might also have a bank account, what we found was that these were the issues that really came up to the surface for people when they told us they were using products or tools or services that were not mainstream. So convenience was a huge factor. Language access, we saw the numbers for California earlier. We know that a lot of people, the LEP population is significant in this state, and so language access is important when people are looking where to bank. Cost, so that refers to minimum balance requirements and any fees associated with a transaction. As well as documentation. We know that there is a significant portion of the community that is not citizen. They're not all undocumented, but they might be legal permanent residents who who haven't taken that step to naturalize just yet. And for some people, not having a social security number can be daunting. They think that any interaction that they have with an agency or an official institution might be troublesome for them, or a lot of times word of mouth. They know someone who has had issues, maybe getting a bank account with an ITIN, and so word of mouth spreads, and when someone in their network has had a bad experience, it can also keep them outside of going down that path too. And familiarity and feeling welcome, which I would actually tie to the language access issue. A lot of times the customer experience is very important to this community, and so the way that someone's being treated, I don't think is outrageous to expect to be treated with respect when you go into an institution that's supposed to be helping you handle your finances and you are giving them your money, literally. So feeling respect is important, so it rose to importance, but I wouldn't say that that's any different probably than any other community. So taking off of this research that we did, we actually were able to expand outside of California and look at a couple of other states. We looked at Texas, Chicago, we looked at Illinois, and we also looked at the Metro Miami area to see what the experience of Latinos was in those areas. And we also were able to look at not only the Latino community, but also the AAPI community and the African American community. So we partnered with National Urban League and National Capacity because they also have affiliate or member-based networks within their organizations. And so we wanted to answer some research questions around financial engagement for these communities as well, looking at low to moderate income families for the most part. We wanted to know how they were accessing financial products, what was influencing their choices that they were making, how were they purchasing, daily financial needs that they had, like buying groceries or lunch, and how were they managing bill pay. And so we wanted to see, sort of what the trends were for all of our communities and where there might have been some differences as well. And so all of that information is actually housed in a report called Banking in Color. And I'll put the website up if you want to go a little bit deeper into the findings. I'm not going to go into all of the findings that we have here today, but just wanted to talk overall about some of the trends that we saw, again, with these research questions in mind. So overall, we saw that there were a couple of key factors that were influencing the way that families and communities were engaging with the financial mainstream. We saw that employment, citizenship, and language spoken really were key to the way that families were engaging with the financial mainstream. And again, this isn't wildly different than what we saw from the FDIC's research, but we know that some of the families that we have access to through our CBO networks are not always the same families that are included in some of the national level studies. And so our CBOs actually have access to families, maybe who were left outside of some of those research because of language access or, for a number of other demographic characteristics that, are common throughout our communities. So, we've looked to this to see that some of these families that we were able to reach are sometimes left out of some of the other data. So for that reason, we think that this is helpful research. And this is, I think, one of the more interesting charts that we have. This is showing, again, the priorities that people have given us as their top 5 ranking for when they select a financial institution. So when we ask people, where is it that you want to bank? What is it that's important to you? We gave them a list of about, maybe 15 or 17 choices, and these are the top 5. And so what we see is that they were the same for the different communities, Latino, AAPI, African American. And then we saw a little bit of difference when we went into language spoken and then when we were looking at our non-citizens as well. So distance, proximity, convenience is key for all of the communities that we looked at. The number of branches, so again, convenience, location is still important to people. We saw that fees and requirements, so pricing is also something that people are sensitive to. And then again, customer service and communicating in language was really important. So, it made it to the top 5 for these communities. And then when you look at, AAPI, for instance, that was even more important, the ability to communicate in someone's native language. And when you looked at non-citizens, it was very close to that as well. And then language, by specific languages, the Asian language community, that was one of the highest ranking for them as well. And so I just think that this is, this helps to sort of paint a picture. These are 3 very distinct communities. They all, what unites them is that they are LMI communities. So when you're looking at solutions that can help target these populations, I think that these are some of the key influencers to keep in mind. And again, if you want some more data, it is housed in our report. And so we asked people about the financial tools they were using. Maybe not surprising, cash was still the most widely used tool for buying groceries and for bill pay as well for a lot of the communities that we looked at. When we looked at the non-citizens and for those for whom English was not their first language, it was also the most heavily used tool as well, which we thought was interesting. But when we talk about financial services and products, financial information is also something that I think, while not tangible, is something that is very important to this community. We're talking about debt and credit and what helps people make decisions about these transactions that they're going to be having is financial information and advice. So we asked people if this was a service that was important to them. They said yes. And we saw differences is where people were able to access this kind of information by a couple of these different characteristics here. So we saw that for people who had attained higher levels of education, they were more likely to go to a professional advisor for this information. What we saw was that people tended to stay within their familial networks. So friends and family was the #1 choice that people would select when asked if you had to seek a financial advice, where would you get it? Which is good that you do have someone in your network who's able to give you this information, but does that person have the best information? I mean, if that person made a bad choice, are they going to also give you the same advice? So what we need is to make sure that someone has information that is not biased, and that someone's not going to be making money off of the decisions or the information they're trying to give you. So what we see is that a lot of our lower income families and communities of color have limited options when they're looking for this kind of financial information and advice. Again, we saw by income it varied widely where people were able to access that information. And so another research project that I think it could be of interest to this group is that Demos, which is another policy think tank, has recently released a couple of reports focused specifically on credit debt and various communities. So they have a report that they released with the ARP that looks at senior Americans. They have a report that looks at the experience of African Americans that they released with NAACP. And so they had a survey of households in 2012, low and middle income households, looking at credit debt. And they recently partnered with NCLR for a report that will be released in the next week or two that's looking at credit debt for the Latino community. And so what they found was that those without debt were better situated to weather the economic downturn. And so what that means is that people who did not have debt compared to households that did carry credit debt were likely to have more stable jobs, their housing wealth was more reliable, and they were less likely to actually be supporting other people at home. So they were less likely to have older adult children living at home with them. They also found that indebted households were likely to forego medical care at twice the rate than people who did not have credit debt. So this is a pretty big, I think that's a pretty big finding. Households without debt also had more assets. So they had more savings, they had homes that were worth more, and they had more equity in their homes as well. And then for Latino-specific data, which again, more detailed information will be provided in the report that will be released, but they found that Latinos were more likely to be carrying credit card debt specifically as a result of not having medical insurance. So hopefully the passage of ACA, the Affordable Care Act, would take care of this. And even though more people might be insured, the ramifications of this had been going on for, this is a trend that they saw over a number of years. It's probably going to take the community quite a while to really get out of that. So we know that medical debt is still going to be significant for the Latino community in the years to come. But one silver lining in this is that the passage of the CARD Act is also something that the report looks at. And so they saw that Latino families specifically actually had been benefiting more, or thought to be benefiting more, as a result of the policies that were put forth by the CARD Act. So regulation is good. And if you want more information on any of the reports that I referenced, we have the California-specific report, then we have the 3 communities that we looked at most recently. Those are the websites, and then the Demos and NCLR report will be released within the next 2 weeks or so. So thank you.
Thank you, Maricel. We're going to take a short break and be back here at 10:25 because we've got a great panel led by Maricela Segura from my office here at the FTC in Los Angeles. Also want to say for the next panels, we are going to be handing out question cards so you can write your question down for the panels. Chris Cagle over there from the FTC will be handing them out. Okay? Back at 10:25.